They mocked Avery Quinn, just a support officer, just a girl with data and dreams. Colonel James Maddox called her a keyboard pilot, laughed at her AI simulations. What he didn't know: she was the architect behind the only system that could fly the Vortex 9 through a storm no human could survive. Stick around, because when the skies turned deadly and Maddox lost control, it was Quinn's voice that guided him home, and the world watched who really belonged in the cockpit. Share with us your location and what time it is there. We love connecting with our global audience. The morning sun glints off Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox's pilot wings as he stands before the sleek Vortex 9 fighter jet, his personal monument to 2 decades of unwavering traditional excellence. The crisp echo of his boots against the hangar floor announces his presence like a drumbeat of authority. Everything about him, from his razor-sharp creased uniform to his perfectly positioned collar pins, screams unquestioned command. "What do you think you're doing?" Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox's voice cuts through the hangar's mechanical hum as he spots Support Officer Avery Quinn hunched over the flight simulator's control panel. His face tightens with disgust as her fingers dance across the touchscreen, programming what he considers an abomination: AI-assisted flight patterns. "Sir, I was just..." Quinn starts, but Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox is already striding forward, his polished boots striking the concrete like hammerfalls. A young airman nearby raises their phone, the camera's red recording light blinking silently. "You were just nothing," he snarls, physically inserting himself between Quinn and the simulator. "These machines require real pilots, 20 years of actual flight experience." He taps his pilot wings meaningfully. "Not support staff playing computer games?" The hangar has gone deadly quiet, dozens of personnel frozen in place as Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox towers over Quinn. His hand unconsciously polishes his pilot wings, a nervous tick, betraying the first microscopic crack in his certainty. The recording airman's hands tremble slightly, but the phone stays steady. "With all due respect, sir," Quinn's voice carries clearly across the silence. "The AI integration data shows a 40% improvement in data." Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox barks out a laugh that echoes off the metal walls. "You think data can replace instinct experience?" He leans closer, invading her space. "Let me make this absolutely clear: you don't belong anywhere near these machines." A subtle shift ripples through the watching crowd. Someone whispers, "General Chen's protege." And for the first time, Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox feels an unfamiliar flutter of uncertainty in his chest. "Lieutenant Colonel Maddox," a sharp voice rings out. Captain Sarah Martinez steps forward, tablet in hand. "Support Officer Quinn's AI flight system demonstration is scheduled for 0900 by direct order of General Chen." The pilot wings suddenly feel heavy on Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox's chest as he processes this information. The phone recording his outburst lowers slowly, but he knows the damage is done. Within hours, wings of pride will trend across military forums and social media, his moment of arrogance preserved forever. Standing alone in his office later, Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox stares at his reflection in the window, fingers tracing the wings that have defined his identity for so long. 20 years of tradition, he murmurs to himself. 20 years of being right. But for the first time, a question nags at him. What if everything he knows about excellence in the air is about to change? Type wings in the comments if you've ever watched someone's unshakable certainty start to crumble. Will Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox's iron grip on traditional flight standards survive the coming storm of innovation? Or will his resistance to change become his final flight into obsolescence? The halls outside buzz with excitement about tomorrow's demonstration. But in his darkened office, Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox can only polish his wings and remember his flight instructor's words from decades ago. The most dangerous pilot isn't the one who fears change, it's the one who refuses to see it coming. Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox stares at the crash report, his fingers drumming against the polished mahogany of his desk. 23 years of unwavering certainty in traditional pilot protocols suddenly feel less solid than the oak beneath his palms. The report's conclusion, pilot error, once seemed as clear as the brass wings pinned to his chest. Now Quinn's AI flight data creates turbulence in his mind he can't ignore. The whine of the Vortex 9 outside his office window pulls his attention. Different today. Wrong. No, just different. Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox has built his career on knowing the difference between wrong and right in the cockpit. The AI readings from Quinn's simulations mock his expertise with their precision, their efficiency, their superiority. Sir, the latest AI performance metrics you requested. His aide's voice carries an undertone he's never noticed before. Doubt. The stack of data lands on his desk like a challenge. Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox reaches for his wings, pin a habit formed through decades of command. The metal feels cold, almost accusatory. Social media notifications flash across his screen. Vortex truth trends higher every hour, with pilots worldwide questioning traditional protocols. His throat tightens. Block those feeds, he barks, but his aide's hesitation speaks volumes. The memory surfaces unbidden. His own instructor, Colonel Harrison, drilling the sacred pilot's creed. Trust your instincts, not the machines. Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox had lived by those words, enforced them, ended careers over them, including Quinn's brother. But the AI data tells a different story, one written in algorithms and success rates that outstrip human capability. Computer display Quinn's brother's flight path analysis. The holographic projection fills his office, bathing Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox in a blue glow that makes his wings pin cast shadows like prison bars across his desk. The AI's predicted course correction ignored that day would have saved the pilot. Science doesn't lie, even when tradition demands it should. A message from Central Command blinks urgently. More bases adopting AI flight protocols. More success stories. More evidence that Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox's rigid stance belongs to a dying era. His fingers trace the edges of his wings, pin-feeling every ridge and dent, each one a reminder of victories that suddenly taste like ash. Sir! His aide again. Officer Quinn's AI demonstration is scheduled for 1400 hours. The press will be present. Of course they will. Vortex truth demands answers, and Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox feels the weight of decades of resistance crushing his shoulders. Studies flash across his screen. Neural network advancement, AI reaction times, pattern recognition capabilities that human pilots can't match. Each point of data chips away at the foundation of his beliefs. His mentor's voice echoes fainter, now drowned out by the undeniable march of progress. The Vortex 9's engines whine again, but this time Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox hears something new in their pitch. Not resistance, but potential. His wing's pin catches the light, and for a moment he sees himself reflected in its surface. Old guard standing against the future. Have you ever watched your certainty crumble, type wings fall, if you felt your foundations shake? Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox straightens his uniform, each crease perfect, each button aligned. But perfection isn't what it used to be. The AI has redefined that too. His hand hovers over Quinn's brother's file, the truth of his error heavy in his grip. Outside his window, the future roars with the sound of engines and innovation, while inside his empire of tradition begins to crack. The clock ticks toward 1400 hours, toward Quinn's demonstration, toward change. Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox's wings pin weighs heavier with each passing minute, a symbol of everything he's fought to preserve, and everything he might have gotten wrong. Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox stared at the flight data scrolling across his monitor, each number piercing his carefully constructed worldview like shrapnel. His hands, usually steady from decades of flight experience, trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of his desk. The test results from Quinn's unauthorized AI integration trials glowed accusingly on the screen. Reaction times 47% faster than traditional methods. Fuel efficiency increased by 32%. Safety parameters exceeded by orders of magnitude. Impossible, Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox muttered, but the data didn't lie. The familiar weight of his pilot wings pressed against his chest like lead as he watched another successful test run through the observation window. Quinn's approach wasn't just working, it was revolutionizing everything he'd spent his career defending. The warning klaxon blared again. But this time, Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox heard it differently, not as a signal of authority, but as a death knell for his outdated methods. He reached for his coffee, knocking it over, as his terminal pinged with yet another successful test notification. The dark liquid spread across his desk like the stain of doubt seeping through his consciousness. Through the window, he observed Flight Officer Lin executing a series of maneuvers that should have been impossible. The AI responded to her subtle inputs like a living thing, anticipating and enhancing her commands in ways that made his traditional control protocols look like relics from another era. Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox's jaw clenched as he heard the excited murmurs from the younger officers gathering at the observation deck. "Sir." His aide appeared at the door, hesitation evident in his voice. "General Roberts is requesting an immediate update on the AI integration trials." Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox felt his chest tighten. The general had been skeptical of his opposition to Quinn's program from the start. Now, with these results, he unconsciously touched his wings again, remembering the day he'd earned them. How proud he'd been, how certain of his path. The base's internal network was buzzing with chatter about the tests. Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox's eyes narrowed as he noticed his name appearing in discussions, not with the usual respect, but with questioning undertones. Dinosaur. Old school? Resistant to change. The words stung more than he cared to admit. He pulled up the security footage from the previous tests, desperately searching for flaws for any justification of his stance. But each replay only confirmed what he'd been denying. Quinn's AI integration was the future, and he was becoming the past. The klaxon sounded again, and Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox watched as Quinn's AI system executed a perfect emergency protocol response, a maneuver that would have taken a human pilot 3 times as long to complete. His own words from this morning's briefing echoed mockingly in his head. AI will never replace human intuition in the cockpit. His phone buzzed with a message from command. Initial reports of AI trial success reaching Pentagon. Full review scheduled tomorrow. Prepare comprehensive briefing. Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox's fingers traced the edges of his wings, feeling every ridge and contour of the symbol he'd lived by for so long. "Have you ever watched everything you believed in crumble before your eyes?" he whispered to the empty office, the warning klaxon's wail seeming to answer with cruel certainty. Type not to wings of change if you've ever seen your certainties challenged. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hangar floor as Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox watched Quinn and Lin prepare for their final test of the day. His authority, once absolute in this domain, felt as insubstantial as the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. The future was here, wearing the face of innovation he'd fought so hard against, and it was proving him wrong with every passing hour. The Vortex 9's controls fight against my grip like a wild stallion emergency lights bathing my cockpit in crimson. 23 years of combat flight experience, and now this piece of silicon dares to challenge my authority. The rescue chopper's distress beacon pulses below a mocking reminder of what's at stake. My jaw clenches until it aches. "Sir, the crosswinds are intensifying. The AI is trying to compensate." My wingman reports, voice tight with concern. I ignore him, forcing the stick harder, but the aircraft shudders in protest. Warning klaxons shriek through my helmet and sweat trickles down my neck. Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox doesn't fail missions. Not ever. Colonel Maddox. Quinn's voice crackles through the radio, steady and clear despite the chaos. My fingers whiten on the controls. The AI's predictive patterns are reading the storm cell. If you'll just silence Officer Quinn. I bark, but the words taste like ash. The rescue chopper's signal grows weaker. 3 lives hanging in the balance, and my damned pride is holding the scissors. The aircraft lurches violently, and for a horrifying moment, I'm no longer the decorated Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox, but a rookie pilot losing control. The stick goes dead in my hands. Red warning lights flash across my instrument panel like accusatory eyes. Quinn's voice returns softer now. Sir, please, let me guide you through the AI's approach. It's seeing patterns we can't. My chest constricts as memories flash by. All those pilots I've grounded for suggesting AI could outthink human instinct, all those careers I've stalled, including Quinn's. The weight of my wings pin suddenly feels like lead against my chest. Colonel Maddox, we're losing our window, Quinn persists. The rescue chopper's beacon flickers weaker still. An eternity passes in seconds as I wrestle not with the aircraft but with myself. Finally, the words scrape past my lips like broken glass. Proceed, Officer Quinn. Release your override, sir. Let the AI take point while you follow these vectors. Every instruction she gives feels like a needle under my skin, but I comply. The Vortex 9 steadies immediately, moving with an eerie grace through the turbulence. My decades of experience scream that these maneuvers are wrong impossible. Yet we're cutting through the storm like it's clear air. 3 minutes later, we touch down beside the rescue chopper. As medical teams rush past my aircraft, the reality of what just happened hits me like a physical blow. Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox, the human control hardliner, just succeeded by surrendering to an AI. My hands shake as I remove my helmet. The wing's pin catches the rescue lights, sending shimmers across my cockpit. All those years enforcing the old ways, destroying careers like Quinn's. And she still reached out to help. Through my canopy, I spot Quinn's silhouette in the control tower. She's not celebrating or gloating. She's already focused on the next flight, the next innovation, the next chance to prove what I've fought so hard to deny. Vertspurtern. Drop. 1. If you've ever had to swallow your pride to do what's right. The emergency crews finish loading the rescue chopper's crew. They'll live thanks to a method I've spent years crusading against. Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox, the ultimate traditional pilot, saved lives today by admitting he was wrong. My wing's pin feels different now as I trace its edges. No longer a symbol of authority, but a reminder of how close pride can bring us to failure. The sun breaks through the storm clouds, casting long shadows across the airfield. Tomorrow I'll have to face the consequences of this reversal. But for now, in the settling dusk, I let myself feel something I haven't experienced in years: the humility of necessary change. The base loudspeakers crackle to life, announcing the successful rescue. Soon this story will spread through the ranks, how Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox, the great AI opponent, finally embraced the future. My reputation will change forever. But watching the medical helicopters lift off with their precious cargo, I realize some prices are worth paying. Share this video if you believe even the strongest beliefs should bend when lives are at stake. Maddox learns. Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox stands before the Military Review Board, his shoulders carrying the weight of 25 years of unwavering tradition. The polished brass wings pin on his collar, the same one he'd received at his own graduation, catches the fluorescent light, a final gleam of the old guard's defiance. I've spent my career defining excellence through absolute control. Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox begins his voice carrying the gravelly texture of a man who has shouted too many orders. I believed that meant keeping AI in check, keeping pilots in complete command. I was wrong. The packed hearing room falls silent as Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox turns to face Support Officer Quinn. His fingers trace the outline of his wings, pin the same one he'd clutched in anger just 24 hours ago. Now it feels different. Lighter, somehow, like a burden ready to be released. The future of aviation isn't about man versus machine. Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox continues his hand steady as they unfasten the wings. It's about partnership. Quinn showed us that. While I was fighting to maintain control, she was pioneering a symphony between human intuition and artificial intelligence. The cameras whir to life as Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox steps forward. This pin represents the pinnacle of traditional pilot achievement. He declares his voice carrying to every corner of the room. But tradition must evolve. With deliberate precision, Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox pins his wings on Quinn's collar. The metallic click echoes through the silent chamber, a sound that will be replayed millions of times across social media platforms within hours. New Age Off-Flight isn't about surrender, he says, looking directly into the nearest camera. It's about growth. The applause starts slowly, then builds to a thunderous roar. Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox feels a weight lift from his shoulders as decades of rigid doctrine dissolve in this moment of transformation. His phone buzzes in his pocket. New Age of Flight is already trending. Have you ever had to admit that everything you believed was only half the story? Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox asks the assembled crowd. Type evolve if you've ever had to let go of old beliefs to embrace something better. Later in his office, Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox watches as maintenance crews remove the manual control-only signs from the flight simulator rooms. His reflection in the window shows a different man than the one who arrived at base yesterday morning. Humbler, wiser, ready for the future. The greatest strength of a leader, Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox records in his final official statement, isn't in never changing course, but in knowing when to chart a new one. Support Officer Quinn didn't just challenge our protocols, she showed us a better way forward. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is admit we were wrong and embrace change. The base's AI system chimes with perfect timing, and Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox smiles at the irony. Share this moment if you believe in the power of change, he says to the documentary crew, capturing these final moments. Because today we're not just changing protocols, we're changing the future of aviation itself. As the sun sets on the airfield, Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox watches a mixed crew of human pilots and AI specialists prepare for the evening flights. The familiar roar of jet engines mingles with the soft hum of quantum computers, creating a new symphony of progress. His former wing's pin catches the last rays of sunlight on Quinn's collar as she leads the briefing, a bright beacon of the future he once feared, but now embraces. Drop 2 if you're ready to soar into this new age with us, Lieutenant Colonel James Maddox says to the camera, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of a man who has found a greater truth than the one he started with. Because the sky isn't just for those who control it, it's for those brave enough to share it.